Hello, my name is Rickard, and in this tutorial, I'm going to teach you every shortcut you need to know in Photoshop. If you want to follow along, I do have a PDF with all of the shortcuts, and it includes a column for Mac and a column for Windows with the shortcut listed. So go ahead, you can download that. I have a link in the description. Otherwise, I will note that I'm using a Mac, so when I say the shortcut, I will say the Mac shortcut. However, on the screen, I will show you what the Mac and the PC shortcuts are. Now, if you're a Windows user, the simplicity of the shortcuts is they are exactly the same. In 99 out of 100 cases, they're exactly the same as the Mac shortcuts, with the simple change of when I say Command, you use Control, and when I say Option, you use Alt. Beyond that, all the shortcuts are the same between Mac and Windows if you're using Photoshop. So don't be discouraged if you're a Windows user. You will see all your shortcuts, and just remember Command, Control, Option, Alt. All right, let's get started. The first set I'm going to show you is Program Basics. So let's get started. All right, the first shortcut is Command N, and that is to create a new document. That'll bring up the new document dialog, and from there you can put in your settings and hit create. Next is opening a document, and for that you're going to use Command O, and that will allow you to open a document that you want to open. In this case, I will go to this document here. All right, next we have close document, and to do that, I'm going to do Command W. All right, next we have save, and the shortcut for that is Command S. Next we have save for web, and for that I'm going to use Shift Option Command S, and that'll bring up the Save for Web dialog, which allows me to save this as a JPEG or other format for the web. Next, we have undo, and undo simply undoes, and that's Command Z. And then if we add Shift to that, Shift Command Z, it'll redo the last thing that we did. So that's undo and redo, pretty common shortcuts, Command Z and Command Shift Z. Next, we have copy. And copy, if you have nothing selected, will copy a layer, so Command C. And then if I do Command V, it'll paste it in the center. Now, if I do have a selection, so here we go, I have now a selection and it's selecting this portion. If I do Command C and then Command V, you'll see that it has pasted my selection as opposed to the whole layer. So one other shortcut I want to show you is copy merged state. So for example, if I go here and I want to make a copy of this, the layer I have selected is only this, so this won't copy anything. So in order to copy everything, I'm going to do Shift Command C, and what that's going to do, if I now paste Command V, is it's going to copy everything as a merged state. So that's Shift Command C, and the other one is Shift Command V, and what that does is it pastes in place. So for example, here I don't have a selection, but I do have the lens layer selected. If I do Command C and Command V, it's going to paste it in the middle. But if I do Shift Command V, it's going to place it exactly where the previous one was. So Shift Command V pastes in place, and that finishes all the basic program shortcuts. The next set of shortcuts I'm going to show you are the tool shortcuts, and all those use a single letter. So let's go ahead and cover all those. So the first tool is the Move tool, and the shortcut for that is V. Simply hit V on your keyboard. And that is the default tool, So when you're generally operating in Photoshop, unless you're specifically using one of the tools, you should be on the Move tool. And again, the shortcut for that is V. Next, we have the Marquee tool, and the shortcut for that is M. Next is the Lasso tool, and the shortcut for that is L for Lasso. Next, we have Quick Select, and the shortcut for that is W, and that allows us to quick select. Next, we have the Crop tool. If I hit C on the keyboard, that brings up the Crop tool. Next is the Eyedropper tool, and that's I, and that allows me to select colors. Next, we have the Spot Healing tools, that's J, and that allows me to do spot healing with the spot healing brush. And you'll notice that there's other tools that also have the J shortcut, and for those tools you have two options. One is to simply toggle through the tools with the single letter shortcut. Otherwise, you can go to Preferences under Tools and turn on the Use Shift key for tool switch, and if you have that turned on, to toggle through the various tools that share the same shortcut, simply use Shift, and that will toggle you through the various tools. Personally, I prefer just hitting a single letter for the tool shortcuts, so I'm going to keep that off. All right, next we have the Brush tool, and for that it's B for brush. Next, we have the Clone Stamp tool, and that's S for stamp. Next, we have the Eraser tool, and that's E for eraser. Next, we have the Gradient tool, and the Gradient tool is G for gradient. That is also the shortcut for the paint bucket. Now, if you find a tool that you don't often use, like I never use the paintbrush tool, you can go to these three dots down here, click on that, go to the top where it says Edit Toolbar, and take the tools that you don't use, like in this case, we'll go to the Paint Bucket tool. Wherever that is, Paint Bucket tool, you'll see that has the G shortcut, and if it's in here, it's going to trigger with the G shortcut, but I never use this tool, so I'm just going to drag it to this side, and that will take it out of my toolbar, and I want to make sure this is checked, disable shortcuts for hidden toolbar extras, and then hit done. All right, next is the Dodge and Burn tools, and the shortcut for that is O. Next, we have the Pen tool, and the shortcut for that is P for pen. Next, we have the Type tool, and the Type tool is T for type. And there you can see I have the Type tool. Next is the Path Select tool, and the shortcut for that is A. And that puts me on the Path Select tool. Next, we have the Vector Shape tool, and the shortcut for that is U, and you can see there my Shape tool has been activated. Next, we have the Hand tool, and that's H, and the H simply lets me pan around my canvas. Next, we have the Rotate Canvas tool, and the shortcut for that is R for rotate, and that allows me to rotate my canvas, and if I hold Shift, it will keep my rotations to 15 degrees, making it easier to go back to 0. Next, we have the Zoom tool, and the shortcut for that is Z for zoom, and that allows me to click and zoom, and by holding down Option, I can zoom out, or with Scrubby Zoom turned on, I can click and drag right or left to zoom in and out, and wherever I click is where it's going to zoom in and out from. Next, we have defaulting colors to black and white. Here you can see my foreground color is blue and my background color is black. If I hit D on the keyboard, it's going to default those to black and white. Next is the toggling the front and back colors, and the shortcut for that is X on your keyboard, and that will toggle your foreground and background colors back and forth. Next, we have toggling the quick mask, and the shortcut for that is Q. Now you'll notice that this became pink, but nothing changed, and that's because I don't have a selection. If I have a selection and hit Q, you'll notice that my selection turns into a quick mask that I can manipulate with filters such as blur or paint with a black and white brush to change my selection, and when I hit Q again, it adds that information to the selection. So that's Q for quick mask. Next, I want to discuss how we get into the tool options using a shortcut. So here, for example, I'm on the brush tool. I want to change the opacity, flow, and smoothing. How do I get up there? And the answer to that is the return key. That will throw my cursor up into here. You'll see opacity is highlighted. And to move through the options, hit Tab, and to go backwards, it's Shift Tab. So that allows you to make changes up here, and then you can hit return again, and those changes will be active in the tool that you are using. So that's just a great way to jump up here, make changes to your tool, jump back down without having to move your mouse. And finally, most tools have alternative behaviors, and the shortcut for that is Option or Shift. So here you can see I've made a selection, and you'll notice here are various tool behaviors or tool options. So if I hold Shift, you'll notice that this changes. Now I'm adding to the selection. If I hold Option, I'm subtracting from the selection. And if I hold them together, Shift and Option, I'm intersecting. Now, most of the tools have alternate behaviors, so just as you're using the various tools, hold down Option, hold down Shift and Option together, and see how the tool behavior changes. And that wraps up all of the tools. The next set of shortcuts are navigation and layers. So in these shortcuts, you're going to use various commands, and there are a few shortcuts that actually use the mouse. I'm going to show you those as well, just because they're very important when you're navigating in your document or through your layers palette. So let's cover those next. Okay, so the first shortcut is the temporary hand tool. So if you're on any of the tools aside from the hand tool and want to activate panning, simply hold down the spacebar, and that'll temporarily give you your hand tool. Next, we have temporary zoom, and for that you're going to hold down Command and the spacebar, and that'll give you the zoom. And you can do scrubby zoom if you have that turned on, or you can click to zoom and add Option to the shortcut to zoom out. Next, we have temporary auto select. Now you'll see here I have auto select turned on. That means if I have a layer selected, such as this lens, if I click and drag anywhere in my canvas, you're going to see that I am moving my layer. Now, with auto select turned on, if I click somewhere outside of my layer, you'll see that it's now automatically selected a different layer. Personally, I don't like that behavior, so I keep this turned off. However, if I want to temporarily activate it, I can hold down the Command key and then select the layer that I want to work on. So that's Command. Next, we have Zoom to fit screen, and that's Command 0. And that fits your document in your window. Next, we have Zoom to 100%, and that's Command 1. And that'll make your pixels 100% of their actual size on your screen. Next, we have zooming in and zooming out, and for that we're going to do Command and plus to zoom in and Command and minus to zoom out. Next, we have the screen modes, and the screen modes you can see here. We've got the standard screen mode, the full screen mode with menu bar, and the full screen mode. So F on your keyboard, there you can see the full screen mode without the menu bar, and F again is full screen mode, and then F one more time is back to the standard view. Next, we have hiding the palettes, and to do that you're going to hit Tab, and you can see my palettes are now hidden. If I hit tab again, you can see them again. Next, we have new layer, and for that, the shortcut is very similar to the new document, except for you're going to add shift. So shift command N, that will bring up the new layer dialog. And from there, you can add a new layer. Next, we have toggle rulers, and for that, you're going to do command R, and there you can see my ruler has now shown up. And to hide it, I'm going to do command R again. Next, we have toggle guides, and that is command semicolon. And there you can see my guides turned on and turned off. Next, we have hide extras. So hide extras includes the guides. It also includes the smart guides, the grid, and various other options that you can have turned on. The shortcut for that is command H. So that'll turn off all your guides and the smart guides. Next, we have new layer via copy. This is one you're going to use very often, and that's command J. So here you can see by doing command J, I've made a copy of my selected layer. And if I have a selection like so and do command J, it's going to make a copy, a new layer from my selection as a copy. Next, we have the same thing, but it's via cut. So it's a new layer via cut rather than via copy. So in this case, if I have a selection like this and I do command shift J, sorry, it won't work on a smart object, so we'll do it on this one here. If I do shift command J, you can see I now have a layer that is my selection, and you can see the previous layer that I cut it from has that element cut out of it. We'll just go back here. There you go. So that's new layer via cut. Next, we have group layer, and that will put whatever layer you have selected into a group, and that's command G. So there you can see my lens layer is now in a group, and if I have multiple layers selected and do command G, it'll put all of them in a group. Next, we have clip layer, and a clip layer means the layer on top is only affecting the layer below it and also inherits the transparency of the layer below it. So in this case, there's a bit of fog on top of this lens and it's clipped to this layer. So to clip, hold down Option and click between the two layers. You can see as I toggle that it's affecting everything versus just affecting this layer. So that's Option and clicking between two layers. Next is isolating the mask view. And for that, you're going to hold down Option and click on your mask. And there you can see I've now isolated my mask and I can work on the mask. To toggle that, Option and click on the mask icon again. Next, we have activating and deactivating your mask. And to do that, you're going to hold down Shift and click on the mask. You can see the mask has now been deactivated with the big red X. And if I shift click on it again, it'll reactivate the mask. Next, we have the isolate layer toggle. And to do that, you're going to hold down Option and click on the eyeball. And there you can see it's isolated that layer. And if I Option click on the eyeball again, it'll bring back all your other layers. Next, we have the clip selected layer. So in this case, I have this layer here selected, and to toggle the clipping, I'm going to hold down Command, Option, and G. And there you can see it is toggling the clipping of that layer to the layer below it. Next, we have moving a layer up or down. So in this case, I will take this layer here, and by holding down Command and then doing the left bracket, it's going to move it down in my layer stack. And with the right bracket, holding down Command, it's going to move it up in the layer stack. Next, we have selecting in the layer stack. And instead of holding down Command, I'm going to hold down Option, and the left bracket will select layers down, and the right bracket will select layers up. you can see nothing is moving in my layer stack. However, the active layer is changing. Next, we have merge layers, and that is Command E. So if I have a layer selected and do Command, I have to have two layers selected here, Command E, you can see those two layers are now merged into a single layer, and that works with two or more layers. So I can select all these, Command E, and it'll merge all those layers together. Next, we have merging all visible layers into a new layer. So here I'm going to go to the very top and I'm going to do Shift Option Command E, and you can see it's created a new layer that's a merged version of my entire document. Again, that's Shift Option Command E, and then finally we have toggling layer visibility. And to do that, here you can see I have this layer here selected. Command and comma will toggle the visibility of your layer. And that finishes the navigation and layer shortcuts. These next few shortcuts are for selections, and we're going to cover those now. So the first selection shortcut is inverting your selection. Here you can see I have this lens selected. And if I do Shift Command I now have everything but the lens selected. So Shift Command I inverts your selection. Next we have Command D, and that deselects. So Command D, there you can see my selection has been dropped. Next we have Command A, and that selects all. So that simply selects everything in your canvas. Next we have Select All Layers, and for that I'm going to add Option. So Option Command A, and there you can see all my layers are selected. If I only have one selected, Command Option A will select all my layers. Next we have selecting the transparency of a layer, and to do that hold down Command and click on the thumbnail, and there you can see I've made a selection of this. And this also works on masks. So if I hold down Command, click on this mask, I have now made a selection of that mask. This also works for paths. So here you can see I have a path, and if I Command click on it, it'll make a selection of that path. And it also works on channels. So if I Command click on any channel, it'll select the white portions of that and gradually also select into the grays, and it'll keep the blacks unselected. So that works for channels, paths, and layers. Simply hold down Command and click on either the thumbnail of the layer to select the layer's transparency, or click on a mask to select the mask transparency. Next, we have shortcuts for actions in Photoshop, such as adjustments, placing, free transform, rotating, distorting, all those. We're going to cover those shortcuts now. Let's get started. Okay, so for actions, the first shortcut is Command T, and that is transform. So if I do Command T, you'll see my transform controls show up, and this allows me to rotate or scale or skew my layer. Next, we have repeat the last transform. So in this case, if I take a layer here, do Command T and rotate this, and then do Shift Command T, you'll notice that it is repeating my last transform. Next, we have a few shortcuts that work while you're in free transform. So I'm going to do Command T to bring up my transform. And the first one is by holding Option, I'm going to transform from my anchor point. This is my anchor point here. If you don't see it, just click on this little check mark up here. You can then move this, and by holding Option, it's going to transform from that point. Next, we have placing this anchor point, and to do that, hold down Option and click, and that will place the anchor point. So if I place the anchor point here, you can see it's rotating from that point. Next, we have skew and distort a corner, and to do that, you're going to hold down Command and grab one of these corners or handles, and with Command held down while you're dragging it, you can see you're now distorting or skewing the layer as opposed to scaling it. Next, we have transform disproportionately. So if I do Command T and I drag any of these, you'll notice that it's keeping the proportions of the image. If I hold down Shift, it will not keep the proportions of the image anymore. Now, until the last two versions of Photoshop, this behavior was reversed, meaning by holding down Shift, you kept the proportions, and while not holding down Shift, you could do whatever you want. If you prefer that behavior, you can go under Preferences, and under General, you can do Use Legacy Free Transform, and that will reverse the Shift behavior. Next, we have filling a layer with your foreground color. So I'm going to create a new layer here. We'll call this foreground color. And I'm going to change my foreground color to red. And to fill with my foreground color, I'm going to hold down Option and hit the Delete key. So there you can see that entire layer has been filled with my foreground color. And I'm going to make my background color blue. And to fill with my background color, instead of Option Delete, I'm going to do Command Delete. And there you can see I've now filled with my background color. Next, we have the same thing, but with respecting transparency. So here you can see I have my hands selected, and if I do Option Delete, it's going to fill the whole layer. So let's undo that. But if I add Shift to the equation, so if I do Shift Option Delete, it's going to fill the layer, but it's going to respect the transparency of the layer. So you can see it's only filled in the portions of the layer that are not transparent. So let's do Command Z, and the same thing with filling with the background color. So if I hold down Shift, then Command Delete, it's going to fill with that background color, and it's going to respect the transparency of the layer. So again, just add Shift to your fill commands, and that will respect the transparency when you're filling. Next, we have invert colors, and to do that, you're going to do Command I, and that will invert the colors. Command I again will invert them back. Next, we have levels. For that, I'm going to do Command L for levels, and here I can do my levels. Next, we have curves, and that's Command M, and that'll bring up the curves dialog. Next, we have hue saturation, that's Command U, and that'll allow me to adjust my hue and saturation. Next, we have color balance, that's Command B, that'll allow me to adjust my color balance. And finally, we have black and white, and for that, we're going to do Shift Option Command B, and that'll bring up my black and white dialog. Next, we have blending modes, and blending modes all have a shortcut. And if you're on the Move tool and you have a layer selected, these shortcuts are going to work to change the blending mode of your layer. If you're using a brush tool in Photoshop, these shortcuts will change the blending mode of your brush. Now, all these shortcuts are Shift Option on a Mac and Shift Alt on a PC, but let's cover each of them individually. So for all the blending modes, the shortcuts are going to be Shift Option plus a letter. For PC, that's going to be Shift Alt plus a letter. So I've got this gradient ball here, and we're just going to run through the most used blending modes. So the first one is normal. That's Shift Option N. Now obviously nothing changed there, but if this was on a different blending mode like darken, and if I do Shift Option N, it's going to switch it to the normal blending mode. Now it's important, you have to be on the Move tool for this to work. So hit V, make sure you're on the Move tool, and make sure you have a layer selected. Next, we have screen. That's Shift Option S for screen. There you can see it's on screen. Next, we have multiply. That's Shift Option M for multiply. Next, we have overlay. That's Shift Option O. And then we have soft light, which is Shift Option F. And then we have color, which is Shift Option C. So that covers the blending modes. The one other thing I want to show you, put this back on normal, is how to adjust the opacity and fill with shortcuts. So again, when you're on the Move tool and have a layer selected, the way to change the opacity is hitting a number on your keyboard. So each number corresponds with its equivalent decimal. So 2 equals 20, 5 equals 50, 8 equals 80. Now, if you want a more accurate percentage, like 25, simply hit 25 one after another, and it'll change the opacity to 25%. And to bring it back to 100%, hit 0. So there you go. That's how you change the opacity of a layer. Now next we have the fill. And for fill, you're going to do exactly the same thing, but you're going to do it while holding down the Shift key. So if I want this to be 50% fill, I'm going to hold down Shift and hit 5. If I want the fill to be 25, I'm going to hold down Shift and do 25. And again, Shift 0 brings that back to 100. So there you go. Those are the shortcuts for blending layers. This next set of shortcuts are for painting in Photoshop, and they apply when you're using the brush tool or the clone stamp tool. Pretty much any brush-based tool in Photoshop, these shortcuts are going to work for that. Let's cover them now. So let's first go ahead and activate the brush tool with B. That's going to put you on the brush mode. And I want to show you some shortcuts that relate to painting. So the first one is increasing and decreasing your brush size. To do that, you're going to use the left bracket to make it smaller and the right bracket to make your brush bigger. I'm going to bring up the brush palette here. Let's go ahead and go to brush settings, and I'm just going to have that up here. Now you'll notice that the hardness on this brush is 4%. To adjust the hardness, simply add Shift to your left and right brackets, and you can see that that is adjusting the hardness of the brush by increments of 25%. So Shift left bracket and Shift right bracket will adjust the hardness of your brush. Now these shortcuts all give you certain increments, but they're not very accurate. So my preferred shortcut is for a Mac, you're going to hold down Control and Option, and then left mouse click, and then drag left and right, and that's going to adjust the diameter of the brush. And then to adjust the hardness, hold down Control, Option, and drag up and down. Now for a PC, this is one of the few shortcuts that doesn't directly translate. On a PC, what you're going to do is hold down the Alt key and then right mouse click and drag left and right to change the diameter of your brush, and then Alt and right mouse click, drag up and down to adjust the feather of your brush. Next, we have toggling through your brush presets. So let's go ahead and bring up the brush presets here. I'm just going to put this here so you can see it. And for that, I'm going to use the comma key to move up and the period key to move down. And there you can see I'm toggling through all my brush presets. Probably the best way to use this is have two primary brushes that you're using and then simply toggle back and forth between them with period and comma. Next, we have the eyedropper and clone source. So this, when you're on your brush, so to bring up this, by the way, just right mouse click, that'll bring up your brushes. Once you have your brushes selected, holding down the Option key will bring up the eyedropper. So this allows you to select a foreground color. As you're painting, you can change that color by just holding down Option and selecting a new color. And when you're using the clone stamp tool, which is S, the Option key will select your clone source. So by Option, That's my clone source. So that's what Option does when you're using a brush tool. It allows you to either eyedrop or select your clone source. Next, we have brush opacity. So let's go back onto our brush. Now, I showed you previously how to change the opacity and fill of your layer. Now, I mentioned that you have to be on the Move tool to do that, because if you're on the brush tool, those same shortcuts affect the opacity and the flow of the brush. So if I hit 5, you'll notice that the opacity of my brush has changed to 50%. And if I do 0, it's back to 100, 1 is 10, and so forth. If I do 55, it'll make it 55. And to adjust the flow, it's the same thing while holding down the Shift key. So Shift 0 will bring the flow to 100, Shift 1 to 10, Shift 55, and so forth. And then finally, if I create a new layer here and I'm painting and I want to move this layer, but I don't want to switch tools, what I can do is just hold down the Command key while I have my brush tool selected. That'll temporarily put me into the Move tool. I can then move my layer around and then let go and keep brushing. So those are all shortcuts that you use while using the brush or paint tools in Photoshop. The last set of shortcuts are for typography, and this is when you're doing type in Photoshop. Obviously, some of the other Photoshop shortcuts aren't going to work if you have your type tool engaged. So if I type a V, rather than putting me on the Move tool, it's just going to add a V to my text. So these shortcuts are specific for when you are doing typography in Photoshop. Okay, so let's go on to the type tool. I'm going to go ahead and select this type. And the first shortcut I want to show you is the commit type. Now you'll notice this check mark. That's how you do it if you're not using a shortcut. But the shortcut for that is Command Return. And that will commit the type and allow you to use all your other single letter shortcuts. Obviously, if you're in type and you hit V, for example, it's just going to type a V. So Command Return, then hit V, and you can see I've now defaulted to my Move tool. Next, we have toggling the character palette. Now, Command T is free transform, as we already covered. However, if you are in a type box like this and do Command T, it'll bring up your character and paragraph palettes. So that's valuable to know. Command T will toggle those palettes. Next, we have increasing and decreasing the font size. So for that, you have to have some text selected, and then you're going to hold Shift, Command, and do period to make the text bigger, and comma to make the text smaller. Next, we have increasing and decreasing the tracking. So tracking is the space between letters. So if I select this text, and I hold down Option and Shift, and then do my right arrow, you can see it's adding letter spacing, and the left arrow is reducing letter spacing. So that is tracking. Now between two letters, so for example, if I want to pull this W closer to the O, I'm going to put my cursor between the two letters and then use the same shortcut, Shift, Option, left and right, and that will adjust the tracking. Next, we have the leading. So the leading is the space between lines, and for that I have to select more than one line. So I'm going to do Command A to select all my text, and then hold down Option, and the down arrow is going to increase the leading, or the space between the lines, and then the up arrow is going to decrease the leading, or the space between the lines. Next, we have the baseline shift, and that allows you to shift one or more letters from the baseline. To do that, you're going to add Shift, so Shift Option up arrow and Shift Option down arrow. Next, we have bold selected text. So in that case, if I have some text selected, I'm going to do Shift Command B to bold it. and that is a toggle, so doing it again will unbold the text. And we also have the same for italics. So here I'm going to select the saint, and if I do Shift Command I, it's going to italicize that text, and if I do it again, it'll unitalicize the text. Next, we have capitalizing text, and for that, it's Shift Command K to capitalize and Shift Command K to uncapitalize. So that again is a toggle, and that's Shift Command K. The last thing I want to do is show you how to set up your own shortcuts in Photoshop. So if you've gone through all these shortcuts and learned them all, and you still find that there are certain things you do in Photoshop very often, you may want to assign a shortcut for them. A good example is the Gaussian blur. That's a filter that I use all the time, and it does not have a shortcut in Photoshop. So I'm going to show you how to set up a shortcut for it, as well as a few other shortcuts that I personally have set up in my Photoshop. Let's do that next. In order to create your own shortcuts in Photoshop, you're going to go up to Edit, then down to Keyboard Shortcuts. And then from here, you have to know where it is in Photoshop, the action or the tool that you want to give a shortcut to. If it's in the application menu up here, you're going to find it in application menus. If it's in a panel menu, like here, you're going to find it in panel menus. And if it's a tool, obviously it's going to be here, and that'll be under tools. And then finally, task space is for changing your actual workspace. So for most things, you're going to be changing application menu or panel menus. The first one that I want to do is adding a shortcut to Gaussian blur. I know that's in the application menu under filter. So I'm going to go down here and look for blur and then Gaussian blur. You can see here that it has no shortcut assigned. So if I click right here, I can then do Shift Option Command G. That is not assigned to anything else, so I can just hit accept. Next, I want to add a shortcut for flattening the image. So that I know is under the panel menus and under layers, and toward the bottom of that, you're going to see flatten image. It doesn't have a shortcut, so I'm going to do Shift Option Command F. Now that's already in use and will be removed from Select Find Layers. That's a shortcut I never ever use, so I'm going to hit accept because I will use flatten image quite a lot. Next is last filter. The shortcut for this used to be Command F for the longest time, and then after Photoshop added a search function within Photoshop, they reassigned the shortcut to that. Personally, I prefer to have it as the shortcut for last filter, so I'm going to change this to Command F. It's going to tell me that edit and search will be removed, and I'm okay on that, so I'm going to hit accept. Next one is rasterize layer. So this is something that you often do. If you have a smart object, you're going to want to rasterize it. There is no shortcut for that. So we're going to go under layer and go to all the way down. Let's see if we can find it here, rasterize. So I'm going to go right here. And for this, I'm going to use Option Command R, and that's currently being used for select and mask. I don't really use that shortcut, so Option Command R is okay. I'm going to hit accept. Next is adding a layer mask. Right now, I have to go down here to add a layer mask. I'd prefer to have a shortcut for that. So this is also going to be under Application Menu. We're going to go up until we see layer mask, and then the first one is reveal selection and the alternate is hide selection. Those are our two options. Let's go to reveal selection first, and I'm going to use Option Command M, and that's curves with less settings. It's not something I use that often, so I'm going to hit accept, and then for hide it's going to be Shift Option Command M. And edit and menus, I don't use that, so we're going to just go accept and go to conflict. I really don't need a shortcut for the menus, so I'm going to leave that blank. And there you go. I can now save this So I'm going to click on this little icon here, and we can call this Nucly mappings or Nucly shortcuts, and hit save. You'll see that the set has now changed, and hit OK. Now, if I want to Gaussian blur this hand, I can do Shift Option Command G, and I now have my Gaussian blur as a shortcut. And if there's other things that you find yourself constantly using, go ahead and add a shortcut for them, and then just learn that shortcut. So there you have it. Those are all the shortcuts in Photoshop for both Mac and Windows. I hope you learned some new shortcuts, and honestly, if you practice these, you'll become very efficient in Photoshop, and you can cut off about half the time you spend in Photoshop by just learning these shortcuts. The reality is, when you're actually doing design and actually working in Photoshop, most of the actions that you do are repetitive. So if you can decrease the amount of time it takes to do those small individual actions, you'll reduce the amount of time it takes for you to do a whole design or to work on your photography, retouching, or whatever it is that you are doing in Photoshop. So I hope this helped, and I will see you next time. Here are some other videos to check out. In the meantime, you can also go to nucly.com and check out my professional Photoshop training on compositing, retouching, and many other subjects specific to Photoshop.